This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Tonight is Wednesday night, a special meeting of the Lunenburg Finance Committee. It is 7 p.m. and we are meeting completely virtually tonight. Members present are myself, Peter Beardmore, Vice Chair Chris Menard, Dave Passios, and Jay Simeone. And we are expecting the remainder. I have not heard from anybody, so I would expect the remainder to come along as they are available over the course of the evening. Let me read the preamble and we'll get started. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded. However, it is not being broadcast live in any format. The Zoom recording will be posted on the PAC YouTube page following the meeting. The following information is provided for members of the public that wish to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, use the Zoom application, or from a telephone, dial 888-475-4499 and enter webinar ID 792-737-0353. This agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by open meeting law. It is 7:02 and I will call the meeting to order. I'm going to forego the Pledge of Allegiance tonight because we are fully virtual, and that's a little awkward trying to stand at our chairs. Are there any announcements? Hearing none. Is there any public comment from the board? Seeing none. Is there any public comment from the public? Seeing none. We're on a roll. Town Manager and Finance Director report. Madam Town Manager and Mrs. Brochu.
I can't think of anything specific to report tonight. That can't wait till tomorrow, so we can, if you want to move on with the agenda.
Okay, fair enough. I'm all about moving along. So tonight we are hearing a budget presentation from the Montezut Regional Vocational Technical School. We have with us Ms. Tammy Crockett, who is the business director for Monty Tech. Is that a correct title, Tammy? You're muted, by the way.
Yes.
There we go. Okay. So with no further ado, why don't we get into it? Would you like to share slides, or would you prefer that I share the PDF that you sent earlier?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind sharing the PowerPoint or the PDF presentation, it seems to work out better.
I don't mind. Let me just set up my screen accordingly. This is the one that says, is the Lunenburg version?
Yes.
I got two.
One is the budget, it says preliminary budget plan,
Okay.
and the other one says
Yeah.
Lunenburg March 10.
So you're going to brief from the Lunenburg deck?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me get on that.
While you're doing that, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I have a really bad cold, so I hope to get through this without coughing in anybody's ears. But
We will be patient, and no worries if I sympathize. I've been there off and on all winter. So
been a tough week.
Yes.
Okay, can you see my screen?
I can, thank you.
Right.
Well, first of all, thank you for rescheduling our presentation due to my family emergency. So I really appreciate it. Dr. Harity couldn't be here tonight due to the rescheduling, so you just get me.
Quite all right. Glad to have you.
Thank you. I'll start with the next slide. I get to do kind of the niceties that the superintendent would normally do. So we like to just start out the presentation with some things that are happening during this current year. So we received a Safe and Supportive Schools grant. This is actually our second year of the grant. and it's for $10,000. And we've been able to put a team of staff together made up of all different types of staff members who have been doing surveys and getting a feel for what's going on with students and staff around social emotional wellness. And they're actually writing action steps now based on these surveys so that we can continue to work on, as we all know, that's kind of the buzzwords lately, is the social emotional wellness of our students and our staff. So we're happy we received that grant again for the second year. We also received another Massachusetts Skills Capital grant this year of $250,000. And we're using that to our, as well as our Perkins money, some district funds, et cetera. We're using that to support our welding fabrication program. And you can see where we were able to purchase welding booths, an AccuShear plasma cutting system, and new welding system. And so this is helping both our day students as well as our continuing studies night school program for our adults. So these skills capital grants are great. On the next slide, you'll see some other things that we're doing this year is, again, providing supplemental support. So this is, we using our COVID funds or ESSER dollars to provide after school, before school, and summer programs. So last summer, as well as this up and coming summer, we're running what we call boost camps, rising freshman camps, summer school, summer academies. These are all based on addressing student learning loss. And we're providing all of these programs free of charge to students. We're providing meals for them and busing. And we're using our COVID funds to do this, as well as we're doing vocational after school academies for students who need to stay and develop some more of their competencies that they lost during the pandemic. So we're continuing on with that. I talked to you a little bit ago about the social emotional supports. We also, I think when we last spoke to you, we were about to replace the generator, which we did do this year. And it was the original generator to the school when it was built. So that's a great task. We were also able to upgrade some of our HVAC units that service 4 vocational programs. Really, it added tempered air to a couple of the shops. One of them was graphics, because without the tempered air, the paper and everything was not processing. You know, it was folding up and everything, so it wasn't good for the shop. So the other was engineering, which we were having a hard time with all the computer equipments in there. So these upgrades were really helpful. We also purchased 380 Chromebooks for incoming freshmen. We configured 2 new firewalls, and we're transitioning from physical servers to virtual servers, all as part of this new kind of COVID world we live in. The next slide. Thank you so much. This is what we're planning to do with our FY23 budget plan. So with staffing and benefits, we do have a contractual COLA increase of 1.5%. We have our health insurance premium increases of 5%. And we want to continue our staffing levels from the COVID pandemic. So over the past 2 years, we've had to add a science instructor, half a physical education teacher, half a social studies teacher, and a half a custodian. Mostly, you know, this was due to the social distancing. In order to continue at those levels, we're going to continue with these staff members that we started 2 years ago with. Again, we're going to continue improving and working upon the social emotional supports and action steps that our teams have developed, as well as we're moving from X2 Aspen Student Information System to Power School Student Information System. And this is really going to help increase teaching, communication with students, with parents. The teachers are really excited about this, but this is a huge undertaking. So we're using some of our COVID funds for this, as well as professional development dollars to help fund this transition. And then on the next slide, again, as I said before, we're going to continue with the after-school academies, all the summer academies, all the additional supports that we're doing to continue for the learning loss for students. We're also going to be renovating and updating a science lab. Slowly but surely, we're starting to renovate the labs that literally haven't been updated practically since school was open. This will be lab number 6 out of 12. And we also received another Mass Capital Skills grant in the total of $150,000. And we're using this grant, as you can see, to update our dental assisting program. So we're getting new dental doctor chairs with controls, a sterilization center, Beard Viewpox 3D system, storage cabinets. We're also using district funding to help renovate the classroom space. Then for our capital improvements for this year, as part of our facilities assessment, we have to redesign and replace the front canopy that's in front of the school. It's actually pulling away from the building and it's becoming a safety hazard. We're also going to continue to upgrade our HVAC controls and upgrade a couple of HVAC units that weren't upgraded in that big renovation a few years ago. We're actually also working on designing a new daycare center, similarly to what we did with the Vet Tech Center. This would actually be on the other side of our building at the end of the parking lot, and it would house an upgraded daycare center for more classrooms, more learning, and we could move them out there and it would free up space for more classrooms in our current building, as well as our continued parking lot section repaving that we do each year. We do a section that's usually approximately $75,000 per year. Okay. How do we get to pay for all this good stuff? This is where I would normally come in. So you know my presentation. I always like to start with the state budget because it's what drives Monty Tech's budget. We're so close to our net school spending requirement that I feel it's always important just to tell you what's going on with the state. And always at this time, the preliminary budget that the school committee has put forward to our towns to act upon at your annual town meetings is based on the governor's budget. So this as well is based on House 2 budget. You can see the preliminary numbers. Chapter 70 received an increase from this year to next. Another reason you're going to see our foundation budget increased rather significantly, 7.6%. That's due in part to the Student Opportunity Act, which was established a couple of years ago by the legislature. And what they were doing was they were increasing foundation budget rates in different factors of each district's or all districts' foundation budgets. And this was really aimed towards making more equity in achievement gaps with subpopulations, your ELs, low income, special ed students. So some of those areas got additional bumps. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So again, talking about those different categories, and we'll see the numeric value of this on the next slide. Employee benefits received an increase of 4.51%. So what that means is there's a rate established for each grade in the foundation budget for each category of administration, instruction, benefits, special ed. So when I say Fringe received a 4.51% increase, that's the particular line in the foundation budget that received that. All the other categories received an increase of the inflation factor of 4.5%. This wasn't the total inflation, but it was capped at that number. So we'll see that in a minute. And again, the foundation budget assumes special ed in-district enrollment. So for vocational schools, it went from 4.75% to 5%. And for non-vocational schools, it went 3.75 to 4%. So what that means is we get additional funding for each in-district special ed student. Every school does. But rather than take the actual counts, the foundation budget takes a assumed percentage. So in our case, it's 5%, and in comprehensives, it's 4%. So we'll see that on the next slide. Okay, so moving on to the next, this is the numeric version of what I just talked about. So going down the side, you have your categories, which I was just talking to you about: fringe benefits, special ed, etc. And going across the right from columns 1 through 7, these are the different types of education or grade levels. Monty Techs, all students are considered vocational that go to Monty Tech. And vocational gets the highest amount per pupil in each of these categories, as vocational education is to be the highest cost of educating students. We do everything a comprehensive district does, excuse me, as well as we operate 21 individual shops in Monty Tech's case. So you can see going down that column, they take our foundation enrollment, which is 1467 for this year. And we'll talk more about that in a couple minutes. But again, I want to remind you, foundation enrollment is pupils that reside in one of our 18 member communities that attend Monty Tech, pupils that reside in one of our 18 member communities that attend another vocational school or school choice out, or we have a practical nursing program that's Chapter 74 certified, and it would be for students that are in that program that are in one of our 18 towns. That's where the 1467 comes into play. Moving over to columns 8 through 13, this is duplicative counts of the students that are in column 7, and each school district gets additional funding for each of the students listed in these categories. So as I told you on the previous screen, our special ed in-district students are assumed at 5%. So that's where the 71 comes into play. This is another area where school districts are lobbying legislature, because special ed, we have more like closer to 300 special ed in-district students. So this doesn't come anywhere near it, as well as comprehensive districts and other far exceed the 5 or 4% assumed percentage of special ed students. Then for us, we also have students in column 12. These are our EL students. We have 9. So we get an additional bump of money for them. And then column 13 is our low income students, 553. Those are the ones that have been recognized as low income, which is approximately 39% for Monty Tech. So we get additional funding for the pupils that are considered low income. All those added over to column 14 give us our total foundation budget, which is down in row 12, column 14. For Monty Tech for FY23, it's $27,936,176, or $19,043 per pupil. You're going to hear me say this number several times throughout the rest of my presentation. That is the minimum amount Monty Tech must spend per pupil at Monty Tech, not counting transportation, debt service, and capital. Okay, the next slide shows us our Chapter 70 state aid breakdown, and I'm going to work on the right-hand column. You can see our enrollment changed, our foundation enrollment, by 6 students. Our foundation budget increased to that 27 million number that I just showed you how it was calculated, which is just over $2 million. The required contribution from all of our communities is increased to 10,715,954. We're going to look at Lunenburg specifically in a minute. This is each community's ability to pay, what the state calculates based on each community's wealth factor, which I know is the biggest bane of each community's existence and the one that they want to argue with the state the most because they don't often agree with, the state's calculations. Chapter 78, you can see our Chapter 78 increased by 1.7 million to the 17 million mark, and our required net school spending increased by 1.9 million or 7.66%. So I told you we are so close. Monty Tech is so close to net school spending school. So you're going to see already that our budget is going to increase by that 7.66% just to keep up with the required net school spending. Okay, on the next slide. This is a snapshot of what's going on with all our district members. So I told you the increase was 257,000. So you can see each community. You can see Lunenburg went from 83 to 94 in the foundation enrollment, which is an increase of 11 students, which is driving one of our largest increases in required minimum contributions. So Lunenburg's required minimum contribution is going to 1,012,282, or approximately $141,000 increase right off the bat. The next slide will show you how that's calculated. So this is Lunenburg's snapshot. So you've seen this before from me. The state takes the property value of the town. So you can see what the state has said the 2020 property value is. The uniform percentage is what the state uses for every community, regardless. So that 0.3624 is for everybody. And the state says that Lunenburg's ability to pay or effort from its property wealth towards its schools for next year is $6,059,000. The next piece is the 29 income of the residents. You can see that. The uniform percentage, again, is the same for every community in the Commonwealth. And they come up with the local effort from income from Lunenburg, 7,323,830. So the state has calculated that Lunenburg's combined effort. So what's their ability to pay towards their schools? 13,383,446. The next line shows the FY23 foundation budget that's attributed to Lunenburg from all your schools. So that's what you represent for Lunenburg and for Monty Tech as the foundation enrollment. The state calculates 82.5% of that, which is the 18 million, because even if a community is very wealthy and they can contribute more than the foundation enrollment, state wants every community to at least get a minimum amount of Chapter 70 state aid. So because Lunenburg's combined effort yield is less than that, they say, okay, your target share is that 13 million. Moving over to the right column, the state then says, what did Lunenburg pay as its required minimum for this current year we're in? And that's the 11,780,063. Then the Department of Revenue puts in a municipal revenue growth factor for each town. This is different for each community. In Lunenburg's case, it's 3.81%. So the state has said Lunenburg preliminary contribution could be 12,228,883. When they compare that to row 7, it says, oh, Lunenburg has a shortfall in what we're going to ask them to pay to what we think they can afford to pay. And that shortfall is line 21, 1.1 million. And that percentage is 5.29%. So you can see on 23, if your shortfall is between 2.5% and 7.5%, they're adding 1 percentage point to your required contribution. So the 117,801 represents 1% of that line 13. So they add that to what they calculated on line 15. and they come up with Lunenburg's FY23 required local contribution of 12,346,684. And this will be across all the schools. And on the next slide, you'll see how it's allocated amongst your school districts. So this shows Lunenburg and Monty Tech and your foundation enrollment at each. So looking at Monty Tech, you can see there's 94. The FY23 foundation budget, line 7, that's purely the 19,043 number I showed you earlier, times 94 pupils. That's that number, the 1.7. Monty Tech represents 8.20% of your total foundation budget. So what the state does is they take what they say you can pay, or what they're asking you to pay this year, which is right above line 5 to the right, 12,346,684. They take 8.2% of that, and that's how they come up with the required contribution from Lunenburg to Monty Tech for FY23 of 1,012,282. You can also see how it factors Lunenburg's contribution to Lunenburg as well. The next slide is going to show you a breakdown of each category for Monty Tech's assessment to Lunenburg, so you can see where things change. And you can see why I say that I always go through the state. I feel like going through the state budget is so important because as you can see on line for FY23, Lunenburg's required minimum contribution of 1,012,282 represents 96% of your total assessment for Monty Tech that we have no control over whatsoever at the school. The next component is transportation and operating, which you're going to see on the next slide in a minute, the 24,131. That's Lunenburg's share of our transportation costs, less the revenues we're putting towards it, as well as the next line, the capital. That's again our total capital plan for the next year, less the revenues we're putting towards it. So you can see the total assessment to Lunenburg, 1,054,376. And you can see that represents a payment from Lunenburg from your own tax base of 11,217 per pupil. The next slide is going to show you our total budget. And you're going to see some familiar numbers here. So you can see 23, our net school spending requirement. I showed you how that's calculated. Our transportation, we are going into year 1 of a new bus bid, 31 buses for our 18 communities. You can see that was a 6.79% increase. We just came off of a 5-year bus bid. So after hearing some of the horror stories of other school districts getting double-digit increases, although I think it's significant what we pay for transportation, I felt okay that it was still single digits. As I told you, Monty Tech is a barely above net school spending district. We're only proposing being 60,000 above net school spending, which is not even worthy of a percentage point. Our capital plan is 435,000 plus vehicles, which is part of capital, is 485,000. And I showed you on an earlier screen what went into that capital plan. That gives us a total budget this year of 30,796,896. You can see that's a 7.66% budget increase. That's exactly what our net school spending requirement went up by. That's required by the state. The next line shows you what our our chapter 70 is. Whoops, can we just go back up real quick? Thank you, sir. That shows the required minimum. Then the transportation and operating, that's literally our transportation cost plus the above of 60. We're putting our transportation aid in here. This is from our cherry sheet, which right now is a decrease from FY22. We're hoping that when the final iteration of the state budget comes out, that they put a little more funding into transportation aid, and we'll be able to increase those numbers. The other line, Regional Transportation Fund. This is an account that's a revolving fund that the school committee of Monty Tech votes to put money into whatever we receive above what we estimated here on the budget for transportation aid. We put this into a regional transportation reimbursement fund, and that fund must be used to offset community assessments the following fiscal year for transportation. Well, the 340 that you see that we're using in FY22 was the additional amount we received in FY21. I do not yet know what or if we're going to receive additional FY22 funds above the transportation budget of 1,698,452. So the school committee voted to put a conservative number in there right now, hoping that if our transportation aid in this current fiscal year comes in higher, we'll be able to offset assessments even more in the final FY23 budget. As well as E&D, you can see we're proposing $375,000, as well as under capital, another $225,000. So this is proposing $600,000 of the school's E&D, which is a $50,000 increase from FY22. And the next slide.
Tammy, you need to take a drink.
I'm good, thanks, Barb. So the next slide's going to show you our E&D was certified at $1,089,827, or 3.9%. And we are proposing, as I just showed you, to use $600,000 from that to reduce our FY23 assessments. Statutorily, we're allowed to have up to 5% of the following year's budget in that account. Each year, we put a small amount into our stabilization fund. So I wanted to show you where that account is. We're slowly putting money into this account so that when we get to a capital piece of our capital plan, that I'm going to say mid-range, that is like a 500,000 or better, which one of those projects is our electrical main gear needs replacing. It's been there since the school was built. That's approximately 750,000. So we're slowly trying to build to that number so that we don't have to spike a capital assessment to communities in 1 year. We want to be able to fund that type of spending with that. The third amount that I wanted to provide you was our COVID or ESSER 3 funding for it's FY22/23. We're proposed to get 1.464932 for our money. So again, this has to be used to have safe reopening, offset COVID pandemic. So it has some restrictions. We are planning to do some of our HVAC upgrades, some other air quality upgrades, like in cabinet making shop, welding shop, to improve the air quality in those shops. We're planning to use this money for that type of stuff, as well as I told you the supplemental learning things, just because this is really one-time funding and we don't want to create a funding cliff. So we're trying to use it for more capital type items that fall under the guise of the proper usage of the accounts. The next slide is just a breakdown of our enrollment. So for Lunenburg, there's 94 students in your foundation enrollment. 90 of those students attend Monty Tech. 4 of those students are school choice out. 2 go to Neshoba Tech and 2 go to Leominster. That's what makes up the 94 pupils. The other column is your school attending children number. We get that from your superintendent. And that's the students in grades 1 through 12. This does a couple of things. This becomes your basis for your capital assessment, as well as your freshman quota percentage number. So on the next screen, you can see how this works out to a percentage. So Lunenburg represents 6.41% of our operating costs based on the number of pupils in the foundation enrollment. Lunenburg represents 6.91% of capital in the freshman class quota number based on your school attending children number. Excuse me. The following slide is a breakdown of all the community assessments. Again, I went in detail with Lunenburg, but 94 students. Foundation enrollment, that's literally 19,043 per pupil times 94. The required minimum, we saw how that was calculated. The 24,131 is Lunenburg's proportionate share, which I just showed you for each category of our transportation and operating, less the revenues, as well as capital, same factor. So you can see that change for Lunenburg. The following slide shows you a breakdown of kind of where our significant, well, it's by function on the following slide of our expenditures for FY23. And yep, thank you so much. So again, I talked to you about the contractual. So we have a 1.5% COLA as well as step and column movement. So that would be all of your pretty much salary lines. Another large increase, if you're moving down, is textbooks and instructional materials in the function 2000. As you are aware from probably your own homes, your own businesses, everything, the cost of wood, copper, wire, every supply under the planet is doubling, tripling. That affects us greatly because we need those supplies in order to educate the pupils. So we are seeing a significant increase in that line for next year. I explained to you about our pupil transportation costs, which is function 3,300. That's the first year. As well as some of our technology lines, spending lines are going up as we're moving towards enhancing our infrastructure, and the more technology we bring on for some of our shops like CAD drafting and engineering, the more expensive those products become. I also spoke to you about the benefits line. We have a 5% premium increase in those lines, as well as function 9,000 tuition other districts. That's our school choice line, which we don't have say over. That's assessed by the state. So that's a breakdown of the spending of this budget. And now I would love to answer questions that you've probably been dying to ask since I didn't take a breath.
So I just have just really one question with respect to the school choice assessments.
Yes.
What is the per pupil? Actually, two questions. Number one is Monty Tech accepting school choice students, or do you have inbound school choice students? And number two, what is the per pupil assessment for those outbound choice students?
So Monty Tech only accepts incoming school choice students from grades 10 through 12. We do not accept freshmen school choice in students because we already have a waiting list from our communities. So we do not, from our 18 communities. So we do not want to do that. The only reason why we accept grades 10 through 12 is that, say, a freshman lived in Lunenburg when they started, and now they're a junior and they moved to Leominster, which is not part of our district, but they want to stay at Monty Tech. So we would allow them to stay as a school choice in kid. That would come from Leominster. How school choice out works is those 4 pupils from Lunenburg that go to Leominster and Neshoba, they become part of Lunenburg's assessment to Monty Tech. So all the factors of Monty Tech are in play for those 4 kids. So it's 19,043 per pupil for spending that we get allocated on, and then they go into Lunenburg's base for the assessment. So Lunenburg pays Monty Tech that 11,000 per kid that I showed you a calculation of earlier. Then what happens is Monty Tech in turn has to pay for those students. We pay the state back, but then the state pays Leominster and Neshoba. The base for school choice students is 5,000. That's the base. But then if it's a special ed student, we get assessed for all this for the special ed costs as well. So the base is $5,000. The ceiling could be upwards of 15, 20 grand, depending upon a student's special education services. At the other school, we have no control over that. Hope that answered your question.
That does. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, my only other comment, and this is the third time I've listened to this. You give this presentation. It's my third year on the finance committee. It's probably the most thorough budget presentation, aside from the omnibus budget presentation that the town manager gives us, that we get, and I'm very appreciative of it.
Thank you.
Nonetheless, and you've taught me not to shoot the messenger. I find these formulas inherently unfair. I think if you dig into this, some of the things that you talked about with the increased, the additional assessments on things like low income and special ed and that sort of thing, they're equalized and blended across the entire population or entire enrollment. But then because our net income is higher, we get to pay more per student regardless of the source of that student. On top of that, we also get to pay, a flat rate of our income that goes to the state and then back to Monty Tech. So
Yep.
in my mind, we're taxed double for a lot of students that, I do think we have a moral responsibility for that extends beyond our borders. But I think it's inherently unfair. And I think that our legislature has done a disservice to towns like Lunenburg that are in this situation. Nonetheless, that's not for you. That's for the legislature.
I couldn't agree with you more, though, and it's exactly what we heard from Sterling 2 weeks ago. They feel the same way.
I'm sure.
So we hear you.
Okay. With that, I'm sure there are some questions from the board. Mr. Menard.
Sure. So on the Lunenburg district side, we saw an increase in Chapter 70 related to the equation, I guess, being our low income percentages. Did we see a comparable increase in aid that ends up flowing down to us through this budget?
So what happens is the state sets that minimum base for all kids at Monty Tech, that 19,043. I think that's the easiest number I'll start with. That was our foundation budget number, spending per pupil, 19,043. Then the state, I showed you how they calculate like each town's ability to pay. So then what they do is they say, Lunenburg, your ability to pay was, that number they allocated as your required minimum. Off the top of my head, I have to look again. And then the difference is what comes to Monty Tech in form of Chapter 70 aid on behalf of Lunenburg. So in other words, let me try to be clearer here. So Lunenburg's foundation budget of Monty Tech is 1,791,269. What that literally is the 94 kids times the 19,043 per pupil that we have to minimally spend. Then the state said Lunenburg is required to pay that 1,012,282. So the difference between the delta between those two numbers, approximately 780,000, is the amount of Chapter 70 Monty Tech receive on behalf of Lunenburg as part of our total 17 million. If you were Athol that I was presenting to, you would be assessed approximately 3,000 per pupil, and the rest would come from state aid. So it's all based on the community of what the state calculates as your ability to pay, as to how they factor in what amount of Chapter 70 we're getting based on your community. Does that make sense?
I was like following along with the calculations as we went through, but I don't explicitly see how the calculation on the non-vocational side and the calculation on the vocational side kind of factor in this difference where we now had more low-income families.
So don't think about the piece. If we talk about the foundation budget, the first 7 columns are grade levels. So that would be like for elementary school, middle school, etc., high school, vocational. That's just our total number of pupils, 1467. We get a number per kid there. And that's just taking the number of foundation budget times the amount the state allocates, thank you, times so for administration, instructional leadership, classroom, the state has a number set for each of those categories, for each of the columns 1 through 7. So then what it does is it takes, we're all in column 7, it takes that, multiplies it by the rate per line, and that's where you get the column 7 numbers. Column 8 is what you can see, it's called an incremental cost above the base. So that's literally an assumed percentage of kids, 71. So the state says, okay, we think Bonnie Tech in general has 71 kids, special ed kids. So we're gonna give them additional spending money for those kids. And you can see the categories they give you additional money for. Then moving over to column 12, same thing holds true for us. That's our ELs. We actually have 9 ELs. So the state says, okay, we're going to give you a little extra because it costs a little more to educate those students. Okay. Then the low income, 553, that's for our district kids. And again, low income gets additional. The state formula says educating low income kids. And again, remember, this is meant to reduce the equity gap amongst these subpopulations in rows 8 through 13 amongst poor schools, rich schools, wealthier communities, etc. So the state says, okay, you have 553 total low income kids. We're going to give you this much extra spending towards them. So yes, it gets all blended to that total 27 million, which then divided by 1467 students, they come up with the average of 19,043 per student. So that's the basic number that we have to spend for every kid, no matter what town they're from, Athol, Templeton, wherever. That's our base number. That doesn't include transportation, capital, or debt service. So then what happens is the state says, well, of that 19,043, based on all those other factors, we saw Lunenburg's property value wealth. The state said, well, Lunenburg, we think you can afford X. I don't want to flat out use the 11,000 per pupil that I show you on my individual slide, because that factors in your capital assessment and your other operating assessment. But if you were to take what the state says that you need to pay of 1,012,000, the state is actually saying, let me do this math real quick. 1012,282. So of that 19,043 minimum spending, the state has calculated that Lunenburg will pay 10,769, I rounded, of that number per student. And the difference between those two numbers is what we'll get for state aid on behalf of Lunenburg for those pupils. But like I said, if you were to look at Athol's number of the 19,043, Athol might only have to give us 3,000 of their pockets, and we get 16,000 in state aid. Whereas if you look at Harvard, they might have to pay us 18,000 of that 19,000. We get 1,000 on behalf of the students, on behalf of the pupils from Harvard. I know that was totally long-winded, but I hope it helped you see kind of how.
So, Chris, my interpretation of this, and Tammy, please correct me if I'm wrong here, is that the low-income students that go to Monty Tech, that calculation goes into the foundation spending formula,
Correct.
which is applied to the entire school district, and it is applied to the blended Chapter 70 aid. But what does not come into account is what portion of low income students are coming from any given community. At least with respect to that, on the revenue side, it's based on total income and ability to pay. So we're not getting credits in this case for bumping up a tier in low income students that we're seeing in the Lunenburg school district. It doesn't get applied that way. This is basically an ability to pay. And so it's not, the formula is driven differently in this regional use case.
Yeah, it may actually be working against us, maybe.
It is. It is.
Can you go to the one that gets us to Lunenburg needs to pay 10,000 calculation? Maybe it's the next slide or something.
Sure.
Is it this slide? I don't know what slide it is.
Nope, go down to slide, I think 12 will be clear. Okay.
You don't have to go back through it. I just wanted to see
Yep.
it.
So see on here, you have 94 students and your required contribution is 1,012,282. So literally I just did the division for that.
Well, yeah, so, and I guess my takeaway on this is you're kind of at the minimum almost you can spend. So to some extent, it's a great presentation to us so that we understand how we got there, but the reality is there's like nothing we can really do about it, right?
It truly is why I go through the state budget in such detail, because like I said, 96% of your assessment is driven by the state.
Okay.
So correct.
Okay. And then do you think that there's anything forthcoming in next year because of all these ESSER grants running out and how they helped us on this math?
Well, I always say if my crystal ball was working, whew, I'd be rich. But what I would like to say is this might not be, this we hope that we're sending you today is the ceiling. It always is the ceiling of your assessment for the up and coming year. The Monty Tech School Committee is notorious for, if we get any other state aid or any other changes, they will come back to you with a lower assessment. So this isn't even the final iteration of the state budget for 23, but the Monty Tech School Committee is committed to say that what they're put forward to you as an assessment will be the most it'll be for 23. For 24, what I can tell you is I was talking to you earlier at the start of my presentation about the Student Opportunity Act, which was established by the legislature a couple years ago. Well, that incrementally increases foundation budget rates for each category. Well, this is the legislator has says we're going to do this over 7 years. We're only in year 2. So the legislature is going to keep increasing those numbers. Hopefully they'll start looking at how they're funding it. And, working with the towns to make sure that, you all are in agreement with what they're coming up with for your ability to pay. Because I think that's where all our districts, have the biggest concerns is the state has this calculation and that's it. You don't have recourse.
All right, yeah, I had no other questions, and I think vocational school is very important for a great number of students, and I'm fully supportive of it. I do feel that we're at a well, as you say, we're at a disadvantage in these formulas with the town. But thank you very much for walking through this with us.
Of course.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee?
Yeah, Peter, if I could, Dave.
Please, Dave.
Yep. Tammy, again, great presentation. This is also my 3rd year. Peter and I got onto the finance committee the same year. For me, very understandable. Bottom line, as the conclusion came from Chris there a few minutes ago, there is an awful lot we can do except make noise about the way the numbers are calculated. I don't think it's helped much so far, but we need to keep making that noise and hope that the legislature doesn't, find some way for relief for towns like Lunenburg. Although on the other hand, I understand the reasoning behind it statewide, and I tend to agree with it. Maybe it's not fair, but I tend to agree with the process and the reasoning behind the way it's calculated. One quick question for you, transportation. We just here in Lunenburg just signed a new 3-year contract. Has Monty Tech negotiated a contract recently, or do you have one coming up soon?
Yep. So the contract for FY23 will be year 1 of our new 3-year contract. So we just opened bids about a month ago. So that represents a brand new bid.
Okay, so next year we'll see how that.
So now I know our rates for 23, 24, 25. And they're pretty much in that 7% increase range.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess I have one additional. Do you see, are there any services that are being diminished, throughout, the budget that you're given, or is it pretty much equal service from what we had last year?
If anything, it's going to be a lot more service to the students for learning loss and social emotional. We're focusing a lot of money on psychological services, especially through our COVID grants. So no diminished service whatsoever.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to do this, and sympathies for your recent loss.
Thank you.
And we'll let you have the rest of your night back. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Again, really, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Barbara.
Heather.
Take care.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds, as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is the quarterly fiscal report. Prior to the meeting tonight, the finance director and I were talking about tonight's report and another report that she intends to share with us tomorrow, which I think is probably important in terms of adding some context. If you watched last night's select board meeting, What you're going to get tonight is probably pretty similar to what you got last night, which is a view until the end of Q2 or December 31st. We'll get some additional detail in reports tomorrow or later in the week that bring us basically more current to include a portion of Q3. So with that, Mrs. Brochu. Did you send me a report that I'm supposed to display, or do you have one that you want to put up?
I don't have one. Well, I don't know if I have one to put up. If you have it, I know it was sent to you. If you want to display it, you're more than welcome to. I didn't display anything at last night's board meeting.
Okay, well, why don't you talk and I'll see if I can find the report. Did it come from you or Heather?
I believe it was forwarded to you by Heather. Well, what she sent you was just a 2-page summary of both the revenues and expenditures for FY 22 through Q2, which ended on 12/31/2021. And what I will do now is just basically read the summary page and go through the numbers. And when I'm done, if anybody has any questions, they're more than welcome to ask them. And as you stated, Peter, I did say, because I was of the impression at the last meeting that the thought was that what would be presented was going to be based on current revenues and expenditures, and this isn't, because these are quarterly reports that are presented to the board. So this report, like I said, is based on what's happened through December 31st of 2021, and I can provide the committee with an updated expenditure report based on current expenditures to assist you in the FY 23 budget process. But the numbers that I will be talking about tonight are based on the second quarter of FY 22. And basically what I would have to say is that our total collections to date are $23,422,547, which is 51.9% of our FY 22 estimates through December 31st of 2021. And I provided a summary of the individual categories, which can be broken down as: for our local receipts, our estimate for FY 22 is $3,114,991. And to date, we've collected 31% of that estimate, or $979,390. And local receipts are divided up into several different categories. And I can tell you that amongst the different categories are fines and forfeits, which we had a budget of $13,263, and we've actually collected $6,701, which is 51% of the estimate. We have other excise, which is our meals tax revenue. That estimate for FY 22 is $100,980. And through December, we've received $73,364 of that estimate, which represents 73%. We have school revenue, which we budgeted at $60,207, and we've actually received $41,160, which is 68% of the estimate. We have payment in lieu of taxes. The estimate is $1,648. We've actually collected $6,352, which is 385% of what we estimated. We have fees, which are estimated at $176,052. We've collected $76,221, or 43%. Licenses and permits, we budgeted $331,188, collected 144,977, which is 44% of the estimate. Departmental revenue other, which is basically our ambulance receipt revenue, that estimate is $257,370, and through December we had received $128,868, which is 50% of the estimate. Investment income, the estimate is $25,000, actual $7,832, 31% of what was estimated. Departmental revenue, cemeteries, $4,100 was estimated, $3,700 received. 90% of what was estimated has been received. Motor vehicle excise, the estimate for 22 is $1,721,640. Through December, we had received $241,715, or 14% of the estimate. We special assessments, the estimate is $11,844. The actual is $8,052, and that represents 68% of what was estimated. Penalties and interest, the estimate is $200,000, actual $125,812. Percent received 63. And miscellaneous non-recurring, the estimate was $211,699, actual $114,635, and the percentage received is 54. So overall, our local receipt estimate was $3,114,991, and we have received 31% of that estimate. And as I told the board last night, as far as local receipts go, the biggest source of revenue in this category is our motor vehicle excise. And we don't really see any of that revenue until the third quarter of the fiscal year, because that's when the first commitment for the new fiscal year is mailed. So in quarter 3 and quarter 4, we should see significant revenue in that motor vehicle excise category. For taxes, personal property and real estate taxes, the levy estimate is $29,833,387, and we've collected 49% of that estimate through the end of December. And another revenue source in that category is tax lien revenue. And through December, we had received $192,587. And another thing that I mentioned to the board last night is because our tax collector just went through the tax lien sale process, there were several delinquent taxes due the town that were paid in the third quarter. So we should see a significant tax lien revenue increase in quarter 3, which will at the end of this fiscal year flow towards our free cash. And as long as everything else goes well, then we should see that directly translated in our free cash at the close of the fiscal year. For state aid, our estimate was $9,242,812, and we have received 51% of that estimate, or $4,700,512. So that's everything on the revenue side. As far as expenditures go, the total budgeted expenditures are $45,098,552, and as of December 31st, we had expended and or encumbered $22,918,611, or 51% of budgeted expenditures. And if you looked at the detailed report, you would see several appropriations that show percentages that are higher than 50%, but that is mainly due to the fact that departments open up purchase orders at the beginning of the fiscal year. So that's part of the funds that are encumbered. And so they show up as there's a column for expenditures, there's a column for encumbrances, and the percentage that is left includes those encumbered amounts. So there are purchase orders, blanket POs that are open at the beginning of the year that departments work off of. So if you were to look at the actual expenditures to the appropriations, they would be at that 50% range. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Brochu. I was just scrolling through I think you sent it to me. I can't find that report in my email. Could you resend it? And
I
will
can
distribute
resend
to the
it
board?
for you. And Heather, just so that you know, I spoke with Peter at the beginning of the meeting, and I told him that I could provide the committee with an updated expenditure report through the present time so that they have that for their review.
And if you could, I'll be checking email periodically tomorrow. So, if you could just send it to the whole board, whatever you.
I
send.
definitely will.
Save
I'll
me
do
the
it
hassle of
first
having
thing.
a forward, just blast it out. That would be
I
appreciated.
can probably do it tonight after the meeting, so you
All right.
have.
Well, I don't want you to work too late. It's already.
Oh, well, it'll take them a
Yeah.
second.
Okay.
Couple keystrokes.
All right. Any questions for Mrs. Brochu?
I just have one about the tax collection and whatnot and the liens that you were just mentioning. Is that primarily driven by the agreement that was made with I think it was the mobile home group?
Well, that's a
And-
lot. Well, no, that doesn't have anything to do with the tax lien sale, but
Okay,
we received their payment, and that will definitely flow towards free cash at the end of the year, but they were not part of anything that was advertised for the tax lien sale. But we
Okay.
did receive many payments from individuals who were on that list and removed prior to the sale because they did make payment.
okay.
So
So the majority of that's going to go into free cash then, since it's already effectively off the books?
Yes.
Okay.
It would,
So-
it would, flow-
so
it would
there's a-
flow to free, it would become part of free cash as long as when everything else is closed out at the end of the year, we don't have any other deficits anywhere else that we're making up to get to that. But yes,
Okay.
it will,
So it's a cushion
should
until
flow
then, and then it goes to free cash.
directly to free cash, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
tax lien revenue is part of the omnibus budget estimate. Unanticipated back taxes is not, right? Is that a fair?
Well, the penalties and interests that are paid on tax lien revenue are part of our
Are.
local
Right.
receipt estimate,
Okay.
but the principal payments themselves are not.
Or not?
Because
Okay.
it's assumed at the time and the year that they're levied that they would be collected. So our budget is built around
Yep.
whatever that number is.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Mrs. Brochu? Seeing none. Madam Town Manager, would you like to do warrant updates tonight or wait till tomorrow?
If we can wait till tomorrow, because I think that was part of the list of things that we had on the. for
It's on
tomorrow.
it's on both agendas. but-
Okay. All right. I can send out an updated warrant tonight for you.
Yeah, the last one that I have is quite old. So if you could update whatever the draft warrant document is. What letter are we up to?
Double D, I think.
That's not good.
But I won't be able
I
to. be
remember
next
from
week.
last evening, there were no moneyed articles that have added on in the past week. Is that correct?
No,
Had a couple,
the personnel committee, their article, that's a money article for the salary impact. Sewer submitted their articles, their recurring articles, so those are money articles, but they're annual articles that you see every year. And we have 2 citizen petitions and 3 planning board articles. So I think that's ones we haven't talked about really.
Do the citizen petitions have any budget impact?
No, one's a change in sewer service area to add a location to the sewer service area. And the other is a resolution regarding the Native nations.
Sounds fun. All right. Okay, so if you could just send us an update tomorrow. Chris, you said you're not going to be here tomorrow?
No, I have a business dinner I gotta go to.
Right. Okay. Obviously, submit questions or what have you after the meeting, and we'll accommodate whatever we can there. Obviously, we're going to be looking to vote recommendations on the 31st. So fortunately, there aren't a ton of moneyed articles this year, so it shouldn't be too laborious. Okay. Warrant letter update and discussion. Update is actually not quite right. It's an initial look because I've been tardy in getting this to you. Have people had, so I drafted this yesterday, circulated it last night via email. Couple options here. One option is to do a read through and discussion this evening. Another option is just to collect your responses via email over the next 24 hours and revisit this tomorrow, although we do have a very busy agenda tomorrow. Those are basically the two options. We could also kick this to the 31st and do a real-time edit on the 31st as well. But I want to get sort of the thoughts of the board right now on that. No thoughts?
I guess I would probably be the 31st is when we'll have the more comprehensive. I sent you a note.
Yep.
I thought, the outline of it and and everything was good. I recommended perhaps kind of pointing out and giving kudos to the changes for the IT outsourcing, because I think that's going to add to ultimately efficiencies and better service, more comprehensive service maybe. And I was really happy to hear that the schools was part of it. And perhaps just, generally speaking on that theme, wherever we have, the schools and the town and, everyone kind of working collaboratively, like maybe thinking like facilities or something like that. I think that's a net service benefit to the town. It makes town more transparent and easy to understand. So, maybe, I don't know how everyone on the board thinks about this, but certainly from my perspective, I think that we, the IT is a good example of this, and that, we should encourage looking for those opportunities going forward. And maybe mentioning that in the letter would be a good shout out for that.
So what I'm most interested tonight, and you don't have to comment on it tonight or just shoot me an email or whatever, is if I have mischaracterized anything in your impression. Because if I have, then we probably need to discuss it, either one-on-one or as a group, and allow me a little bit of time to kind of organize my thoughts. I don't think there's anything particularly controversial in this. I did take a giant leap and say that we would recommend the town manager's budget proposal, but that's obviously subject to a vote on the 31st. But beyond that, I don't think there's anything super controversial here. So
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's a pretty, from a budgetary standpoint, it's a pretty I'm going to say easy town meeting and go forward on this, but yeah, nothing too controversial, I guess. Although I will ask, do you anticipate something related to 30 whatever School Street and moneyed articles for the demolition of the primary school?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there is a mention in here in the context of debt service around large projects, where I mentioned, 30 School Street and a sundry of other projects. There are substantial funds that, are going to be discussed both as a portion of the capital plan for asbestos remediation and a separate budget to fund tear down with funded by, I believe, available funds. Madam Town Manager, correct me if I'm wrong. That we could mention in the letter. I'd have to think about how to couch it. Because I mean, the reality is that this town meeting, if those articles pass, is kind of, chopping at that tree, right? Like we're beginning to make some progress on the total cost of the ultimate plan for that property, whatever it is.
Is that your question, Chris?
Yes, I guess my question would be, do you envision that there's something the select board is going to put in this warrant related to tear down of the?
There is an
There is
article.
an article.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
so
let me-
there'll be a separate moneyed article specifically for the tear down. So we've got asbestos remediation in the capital plan,
Yep.
but then there's a separate tear down article that will be funded through available funds to that project.
Do we have a value associated with that yet?
Approximately 450,000. But that includes the design, all the design work for both demolition plans, permitting for that, as well as final design for the site.
Meaning that the demolition will occur at the end of the 450? Okay.
Yeah, so I'll Chris, that's a good suggestion. I'll look at the phrasing in that paragraph and think about, does it need another paragraph or whatever? I mean, the other thing that I'm cognizant of is I'm already bumping up on 1,000 words here. And I don't want to, like get into competition with the planning board for killing trees. So I'm kidding. I
don't think you could type long
I don't
enough.
care. I don't care.
Peter, I've got two things on that longer paragraph on page 2.
Sure.
Pretty simple things, and I think I have a question to the town manager in relationship to the comment about our debt ratio is evaluated as poor. Do we actually have a poor rating or less than desirable?
I have to look back at the last bond rating. But Karen, was it, do you recall the language in that? You're
Karen, you're
muted.
muted.
And I know they've always said that our especially excluded debt has been high, but I didn't think they listed that as being poor.
Yeah, so I actually pulled that from a previous letter in full transparency, but that was my last recollection from the bond rating report, but I don't think I've actually seen them report in the last 12 months. So it's a very fair question.
I'm just wondering if it would soften it a little if it's accurate to
Yeah.
say less than desirable.
Yeah, I would summarize it. Our current debt ratio hold us back from achieving the highest bond rating, really.
Okay.
What would the debt ratio need?
Fair statement, Karen? Oh, still can't hear you.
I think that's a fair statement, but I can also look at the rating and see what language they used, but that would soften it, I think.
Okay, so if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. Obviously, this isn't urgent, but Heather, what I just kind of hashed in here is current debt ratio is a limiting factor or holds us back or something.
To achieving the highest bond rating.
Is a limiting factor in us achieving a higher bond rating.
Okay, I'll work on that. That's a good suggestion.
I've got one word to suggest be added to the sentence where the select board is considering redevelopment of the old primary school. I think it should say property right after school, not the school itself.
Yeah. I was just going to put 30 School Street, and then I thought, well, nobody's going to know what that is. So
Right.
just add the word property.
Correct.
That's easy. Okay.
The only other thing that I started was the first paragraph on page 2, the very end of it. The statement that over the next 2 years, we will need to determine what positions we need to maintain and how to fund them. I'm trying to digest that in my head as to who we is. It's really the school's responsibility to sort all of that out.
Well, so
Responsibility to fund it. If it's
yeah,
gonna
so
be maintained.
I actually went, it's interesting you say that because I actually did initially draft it as the school committee. And then the problem is it's like, well, the school committee can determine what positions, but the town's got to figure out how to fund it. And
Right.
I just kind of went with the royal we, I guess there, right? But it's a fair point. We can make the sentence longer and be more specific, but
Yeah, it may be better to just leave it vague like that also. I mean, I didn't have a real problem with it. It just brought a flag up in my mind when I read
and
it.
another thought there is, you know, a very sensitive school committee member could say, well, that's our prerogative, not yours, which would be a fair point. I doubt that they would take that exception.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? And we'll, I'll
I
re-raise it.
just have one about the tear down as well. Is this contingent upon gymnastics in the background. Is this contingent upon the APDC vote that they just took?
There's no contingency.
They voted to approve the certificate to alter.
They did,
That's
which
fine.
allows the warrant article to go in as it is to do the tear down at that point.
It allows for the demolition.
Okay, perfect. I hadn't heard exactly what happened. I just assumed they were connected, but thank you.
You're welcome.
I was very pleased with the outcome of that and pleasantly surprised. So. Okay, good. Minutes, we have no minutes to review tonight. And I don't know that we'll have any tomorrow, but they will be forthcoming soon.
We caught up on all the outstanding minutes from months ago.
From this year, there's some quibbling with last year, but it's not a problem that I'm going to solve before town meeting.
Okay. No, I was just wondering if there's still a backlog.
Yeah, this year we're good. Committee reports. Are there any committee reports?
Well, at select board last night, there was the discussion on the Flat Hill drainage. And I guess the summary of it is the engineer can't stamp the plan that was prepared so far. And Mr. Jeffries was the chair last night, acting chair, and he navigated well through trying to set up a series of events with the homeowners committee at where is it?
Homeowners Association.
The homeowners association, as well as some of the neighbors and other affected parties, to kind of work through how we can collaboratively maybe solve this problem, even potentially solving it at the source. And we're going to do a walkthrough of it on Saturday morning. If anyone, I guess, is interested in seeing the problem, 8 o'clock on Saturday, we're meeting on Flat Hill, kind of across from Allison Acres in that general area, to give an indication to the select board of how the water is flowing through town and that general area.
If I can just add on to that, so related to the capital article, I would still recommend that inclusion of that article in the capital plan. The engineer, Brian Marchetti, based on this site walkthrough, we also discussed at the meeting, was to revise the scope and focus on the source, but doing hydrological study, and topographical, reviewing all old condition plans for the development and how that topography has changed over time. And so that will all help with a solution. And that would be the next step after that. So it's not the end of the recommendation, but at this point, that's what's needed to move forward.
Do you envision that we would see kind of an updated one pager on the scope then associated with that money?
Yes, and I think that's why Brian, we suggested moving forward so quickly on a site visit so he can revisit that scope, and I'd update that slide for town meeting.
And would you be looking to kind of size the scope related to the amount in there today? Or do you think it would go up or down or sideways?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not at this point. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the trick here will be, I support doing whatever we need to do to make progress. I think my reservation is I don't want it to be a wild goose chase. And the way that it was initially presented last night was kind of like an unsolvable problem. But then once everybody started taking bites at the apple, it seemed like, well, maybe there is but the concern is that, number one, is $45,000 enough to get us in the direction where 6 or 12 months from now, we can make forward progress. And number two, is it just a wild goose chase where we're, at the end of $45,000, we're back where we started at the beginning of the presentation last night, which seems like an unsolvable problem.
Well, yeah, I think it's a problem that needs a solution, and somehow we got to get to a solution on it.
Yeah. I don't know.
About the same sentiment as last night.
Yeah.
Like I think I said last night, sometimes I call that Flat Hill River, not
Yeah.
Flat Hill Street.
Yeah, but I think, Chris, going back and taking a good look at the source and the change in hydrology and all of that is going to be really valuable, because it's been talked about a few times over the years in those meetings, but nothing's ever been really looked at. All they've tried is, fix it at Flat Hill Road, and that's not the solution, as was said last night. This problem has been developing probably for a century, exasperated by development.
Yeah. All right. Well, more to follow, I think, probably next week, once we have, a better indication and a redo of the scope. We can have a more detailed discussion on it. Any other committee reports?
Just very quickly remind everybody that Parks Commission will be meeting Tuesday, Tuesday the 29th. Major items for discussion will be, of course, Whalen Park with our architectural design group, and the town beach building. Having a thorough discussion about that as to whether we're going to be in a position to be able to use the building for the beach season or not, and what we need to start looking at for alternatives.
Okay. Any other committee reports? The Municipal Building Design Committee met on Monday night. We had a good discussion with a couple of members of the previous Building Reuse Committee and got some really good back history on their charge and how some of those decisions were made that ultimately got us to the TC Passio's Building Design Committee phase, but also some insights in terms of what was not considered for potential reuse and dissolution of Town Hall and Ritter. I don't know that gets us a lot further in terms of what we ultimately do with those buildings, but it was really good context. There were also some suggestions made about should we ultimately look at situating our government functions on the north side of Mass Ave and not doing the south side of Mass Ave, but thinking in terms of a thoroughfare that runs from Town Hall down Memorial Drive to the school campus, and think through that lens rather than thinking through the lens that straddles Mass Ave with the Ritter Building and Town Hall. So interesting fodder for discussion. The action items were we formed a couple of two-person subcommittees that are going to be kind of breaking open the vertex reports for both Town Hall and Ritter, looking at what has been spent on those two buildings, or what projects have been undertaken on those two buildings since those reports were done, and opportunities or needs that will need to be addressed regardless of use, and then ultimately potentially reporting that out as sort of a potential first step in the process, perhaps connected to a use plan. And we're meeting again next in 2 weeks.
Peter, are you doing anything at town meeting, annual town meeting?
The only thing that is going to happen at town meeting from this committee is a handout report. We're not ready to request any funding at this point. We got off to a rather late start and only started meeting seriously on this in February. And we're just not ready to ask for anything, or for that matter, to take up town meeting time with a live presentation. So there'll be a handout that is effectively an update and solicitation of input. There's been some talk of maybe putting together another survey, but I'm doubtful that will happen at this point. It could, but it doesn't seem that we'd be ready to do that either. Okay. No other committee reports. Is there any public comment? Hearing none. Items for future meetings. Anything additional that we should add to agendas, either for, well, we can't add to we could revise the agenda for tomorrow, but I'd prefer not to. We have plenty to talk about tomorrow, but for the 31st for the public hearing meeting. So there's been some discussion about, and I just want to re-raise this just for consideration. There's been some discussion about, whether we want to entertain a discussion with the capital planning committee, given our discussions about the capital plan over the course of the last couple of months. The capital planning committee, to my knowledge, has not met since they finished their work back in January, I believe, Dave, maybe December. And the question we have not answered the question, and we probably, if we're going to do it, we really need to do it next Thursday, the 31st. My inclination right now is to not do that. My feeling, while I personally have some very serious reservations about a couple of items on the capital plan. My inclination is that I will vote with the majority of this board on the capital plan. And we will obviously discuss that next week. But at this point, I'm not sure that my ultimate vote would be heavily influenced by a further discussion with the capital planning committee, given all the water that has rolled down Flat Hill Road, I guess, to mix metaphors, since the capital planning committee has met. But I did want to open that up and just think, ask if you guys are in general agreement with that.
I'm in general agreement with that.
Okay, so perhaps we will have a lively discussion about the capital plan next week, but we will do that as a finance committee.
I would
All right.
like to know how we access the documents for the capital plan.
I'm sorry, Jay?
The documents that the capital planning uses, how do we access those?
So we have the report from the town manager. I was furnished an Excel spreadsheet by the town manager, I believe, a month or two ago, that I think I forwarded to everybody, that has the breakdown of the prioritization and the scoring for each of the items that was brought forth. I believe I forwarded that. If I didn't, please let me know and I can re-forward it. The minutes for the capital planning meetings are posted on the website, with I think the exception of our last meeting because they couldn't approve minutes. But I can tell you, having read them, there isn't a lot of insight in terms of the prioritization that's found in the minutes.
But is it not documents that department heads submitted for their request?
So there's a tab, there are tabs in that spreadsheet that outline the scoring that the department heads did on their own using I can't remember the name of the system, if somebody knows offhand.
So the departments don't score their projects. They fill out the criteria tabs and it calculates the score based on those responses. But it's from based on the UMass Collins Center model. Mhm.
So but I believe that's in that spreadsheet, right, Heather?
Yes, yeah. So that's what they fill out. They're not, they're all criteria established by the capital planning committee.
Are those meetings recorded?
They were not. No, and I don't think they've been recorded previously.
Can we change that going forward?
That would be up to the chair to make that decision.
Available.
I can bring that to the committee as a suggestion. I did make a comment in at least 2 meetings that I was a little concerned that they weren't recorded, but.
Yeah, I mean, this year in particular, I think it would have been beneficial, in past years, the quibbles that I've had with the capital plan have largely been based on funding, like, the issue we went through a couple of years ago with COVID and the not knowing whether we were going to have money or not and what we could defer and that kind of thing. Really weren't around prioritization, whereas this year, there was clearly an honest debate around those topics that, better context, I think, would have been helpful.
And I think it would have settled more people's minds that the due diligence was done, and at the end of the day, not everybody's happy, but most people would have been happy with the explanations, I believe.
So anyway, all right, I'll leave it at that, and we will discuss as an article next week at the public hearing. Speaking of which, Madam Town Manager, when do you expect to have actual numbers and order for the articles? Will we have that for the public hearing, or what do you think?
I will probably reorder them to the order I will recommend to the board, but they won't be signing off on that until April 5th.
Okay. So given that this is a public hearing and the materials should be available to the public prior to the public hearing, are the draft warrant, is that public posted right now on the website?
No, we just closed Monday, but it will be before then.
Okay.
Be reviewed, just make sure all the typographical, grammar, everything like that is in
Okay,
order.
but so there'll be at least a draft published early next week that you can
Yes.
refer people to. Okay. Okay, good. And then lastly, with respect to upcoming meetings, we probably have discussed upcoming meetings more in this last 10 minutes than we ever have. My intent right now is, and I think I put this on tomorrow's agenda, but just to alert everybody, is to hold a regular meeting on the 14th of April. And I don't anticipate a need right now to hold a second public hearing, but who knows? So that if we need to hold a second public hearing, the game plan would be on the 14th of April. And I just want to air that right now and give anybody an opportunity either to object to that or think about it and come back with a discussion on that tomorrow.
Peter, is there an advertising requirement for a second public meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is why we kind of need to figure it out sooner rather than later.
Right.
Okay. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
It is moved by Chris Menard, seconded by Jay Simeone. Roll call vote. Mr. Menard,
Aye.
Mr. Simeone,
aye.
Mr. Waters,
Aye.
Mr. Passios,
Aye.
and an aye for myself. See y'all tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Town Hall or on a Zoom near you. Have a good night, everybody.
Everyone.
Good night.
Good
Aye.